Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first public consultation on the South Irish Sea project. It is a real pleasure to welcome you all here this evening, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to visit the project website and to register to participate tonight. What we hope at this stage in the evening is that we won't keep you too long. We hope to have you in and out in an hour, and also just to thank those who've already submitted questions in advance of tonight's meeting. For those who haven't or who wish to submit more, there will be the option throughout the evening. There's an email and text number, SMS number available at the bottom of each of the slides, if you could just use those. And I think just to recognise as well, we're aware, and I think one of my colleagues will touch on this later, that this isn't ideal. However, given the current state of the COVID numbers and everything else, we felt that the best approach for this consultation, at least, and bear in mind there will be plenty more, is that we would do it in this way as a webinar, but that in our next consultation we would hopefully have the opportunity to get around and meet face to face in a room. So I think just by way of introduction, my name's Derek Scully. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at Eia Group, and I'm going to take you through just a couple of slides at the outset of this, but want to really stress to you that this is a very early stage in this consultation and in the development of overall in this project. We're not going to have all of the answers, I don't think, as we go through it. However, the intention tonight is to provide you with more information around when answers to questions that you might like to see will be available. So we would have consulted initially and arranged this project in line with the application for our foreshore license in 2020 and early 2020. That process took quite a significant amount of time, but thankfully we're in a position now where South Irish Sea project has been granted a foreshore license, and it allows us, as you'll see later on in the presentation, to move forward and be able to deliver for Ireland's 2030 targets. Again, a point to which I will return to in a minute. So by way, I suppose, of introduction to the team, I'm there. I won't introduce everybody individually, but once I've gone through a brief introduction, Owen and Caroline will talk to you about the project specifics. Rosie will then talk to you about our community and stakeholder engagement. And Amy will talk to you about some of the long-term partnerships that we've had in South Wicklow and Wexford. And before we go back to Rosie, who'll moderate our Q&A session towards the end. And hopefully now you'll be able to see just at the bottom of the slide is the email address and text number for any questions. And probably worth pointing out at this stage, that email address and that number is available to you not just during the webinar, but throughout this project. If there are points which you'd like to contact us with, then please use those numbers and contact details. So just by way of introduction to Eia Group, we are one of the leading energy companies on the island of Ireland. We have operated in the Irish market for 20 years now, or just over 20 years, and we supply approximately 20% of all of the electricity across the island. That includes approximately 25% of all wind power that's already generated on the island. That is including through 15 owned and operated wind farms, and through our experience with those wind farms, which Rosie will touch on a little bit later on, we're making an annual contribution of about 550,000 euros to community benefit funds, and have already provided over 2 million euros to those funds over the early lifetime of the projects. As a group, we're really proud to have achieved the Business Working Responsibly mark, which is recognition not just from business in the community of our community work, but in fact of our overall commitment to climate and indeed our own colleagues and our customers. And as a group, there's almost 920 of us at this stage. We have invested approximately €1 billion to date, but perhaps as an indication of the scale of the challenge ahead, which I'll talk about in just a minute, we have indicated a positive energy investment programme of €3 billion to assist the achievement of the 2030 targets across the island. So with that in mind, probably move to where we are globally, and you'll all probably be aware of the current COP26 discussions in Glasgow. We've had, in fact, two colleagues represent the group at presentations there this week. But what we know from the IPCC report, which received quite a lot of media attention, is that really the point at which we are now is one of grave uncertainty in terms of where the planet will go. It is one of real urgency in terms of the need for action, and as described by the Secretary General of the UN, it is code red for humanity. This isn't just a global issue. I mean, it obviously affects Ireland, and Met Éireann's own report presents some of the most alarming numbers we've seen around this. So 15 of the 20 warmest years on record have occurred since 1990. We've had the wettest decade on record from 2006 to 2015. There has been increases in sea levels, temperatures and acidity around our coasts. And while it is possible to sit back now on the basis of the scientific evidence of the IPCC report and conclude that this was man-made, the more positive message in that is in fact that we can now resolve this, but it requires urgent action. If action, significant additional action, is not taken, it's not done urgently, we will have exhausted the hope to keep the planet on a 1.5 degree temperature increase in 2050 in just 12 years. So it is increasingly important that we act now and we act decisively to address this challenge. And if we look at what Ireland has done, the Irish response, this goes back formally back to about 2019, where Ireland had committed to cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 25% approximately, or 3.5% per annum, which included commitments to 70% renewable electricity and 3.5 gigawatts of offshore wind. Quite quickly, as things started to progress, we realised in fact we needed to do slightly more here. And Ireland then set, as part of the European Commission's legally binding greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, a climate action plan which restated Ireland's commitment to offshore wind in the context of tonight's discussion and showed how important this was going to be in achieving Ireland's targets. The Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act in 2021 introduced a legally binding reduction of 51%. It doubled the 2019 commitment relative to 2018 and really set Ireland on a very ambitious path to decarbonisation. The offshore target, in fact the overall renewable electricity target, has since been increased in the National Development Plan earlier this year, and just last week in the updated Climate Action Plan for 2021, Ireland's commitment to 80% renewables and at least 5 gigawatts of offshore wind was reaffirmed, and again will drive the achievement of Ireland's decarbonisation. Why is that decarbonisation important? Well, through renewable electricity, we can green current electricity consumption and grow electricity consumption to heat principally and transport, which will help overall decarbonise the economy and put Ireland on that pathway to net zero in 2050. What offshore wind delivers is a huge opportunity to deliver that at scale. And again, one of the things I think we'll obviously talk about in a lot more detail when we get to on Caroline, but as a group, we just move to the next slide, firmly set our mind to this. So Energia is now on the path to leading this decarbonisation challenge in Ireland. Energy is our business. We supply customers with electricity and gas, and we want to be at the forefront of energy in the future in Ireland, and the future is renewable. So our positive energy investment programme has committed to 3 billion investment to achieve these 2030 targets and will facilitate the creation of 3,000 to 5,000 jobs in doing so. We have a strong pipeline of onshore wind projects across the island, We are building a battery storage project in Ireland at the moment, 50 megawatt battery storage project in construction. We have a bioenergy facility in construction. We're providing renewable hydrogen and have installed a hydrogen refueling station for buses. We've over 500 megawatts of solar in development, including 250 megawatts of which that has now been consented. And we are looking at delivering new energy solutions to our customers. As I said at the outset, we've been in this market for quite a long time. We have over 820,000 customers. The transition to a low carbon economy will require them to come with us on this journey, but also to be a more active participant. We are a long-term investor in this market, and it is in trying to merge these two as a modern utility, we see the benefit in that renewable investment and that customer focus to assist in driving solutions to aid Ireland's decarbonisation. So I've deliberately left off offshore wind. It is a significant part of our decarbonisation strategy. And at this point, I'd like to hand you over to Owen, who will take you through some of the initial slides on the project.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. So as Derek mentioned, my name's Owen McPartland, and I'm the Offshore Renewables Manager with Eia. So overall development responsibility for our offshore projects. So the South Irish Sea project is a proposed offshore wind farm, and it's located a minimum of 10 kilometres and right out to 25 kilometres from the shore off the coasts of Wexford and South Wicklow. So in 2018, we would have undertaken a detailed engineering and environmental study that assessed the suitability of the marine area all around the coast of Ireland and looking at the potential to locate an offshore wind farm. And this site was one of the areas that was deemed suitable. So as part of this assessment, we've engaged a number of expert consultancies. That assessment is still ongoing, and currently we're looking at assessing the physical environment of the area, the engineering characteristics of the area, and also the potential grid capacity in the transmission network adjacent to the project site. And each of those elements will feed into the overall project size and determine the potential project capacity. So while we don't have a final capacity at this stage, a size that we expect may be suitable is between about 600 and 800 megawatts, and currently that would comprise of between 40 and 60 turbines. And then to put that into further context, that would be sufficient clean electricity to power over 500,000 Irish homes. So on the next slide, and really this graphic takes an overview of an offshore wind farm and the infrastructure that's involved in an offshore project. So on the very right, we have the area that we're assessing for suitability of turbines. And as I said, that's sort of a minimum of 10 and right out to 25. So quite a lot of area there. And each of those offshore wind turbines will be located within the area that we're currently studying. They're going to be connected via inter-array cablings to an offshore project substation. And then that power will then be transmitted through a cable buried at a suitable depth to the landfall point at the onshore location, and then from there it'll move underground into an onshore substation. And then finally, in relation to the operation and maintenance facility, that will be located again adjacent to the project, and that will be to service the project for the full operational lifetime of the project. So then looking at the benefits that the South Irish Sea project brings, and they really are significant. So at the very first point, it goes back to where Derek mentioned in relation to the need to decarbonise our energy system. And the South Irish Sea project does that at scale. So it'll reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as we transition from fossil-based generation to renewable-based generation. Looking at the overall project investment of approximately €2 billion, we know that can translate to approximately 500 million into the regional and national economy. We're looking at ensuring that we meet that percentage, but also how we can increase that percentage, and that's work that we've been undertaking both at a project level and also at an industry level as the project develops. And one of the really key areas for us is in terms of unlocking infrastructure investment and looking at the suitability of Ireland's ports, Ireland's maritime industries, and really looking at the supply chain and the potential opportunities that this project would bring. So specifically in relation to employment, the South Irish Sea project would provide significant opportunities during the construction phase, approximately 800 jobs, and that's for a multi-year construction period. For the long-term operation phase, that's between 70 and 100 long-term jobs. And those are located local to the project in the O&M facility. And then finally, in relation to the Community Benefit Fund, this is an initiative that will apply to all offshore projects, but I suppose one element that we'll talk about, and Rosie will talk about this in later slides, in how we manage this in current projects that we're currently in operations. But it's a substantial community benefit fund that will be paid out to community initiatives and fisheries initiatives on an annual basis for the duration of the RES contracts. So then finally, in terms of the overall project timeline and taking a step back in terms of how these activities all fit into each other. So as Derek mentioned, we applied for our foreshore license initially in 2019 and then undertake our public consultation in 2020. We've now received those licenses, and Caroline will talk about the sorts of studies and surveys that those licenses enable us to do. But ultimately, all of that engineering and environmental design comes together in terms of our planning application, which we're aiming to submit in Q1 or Q2 of 2023. We're then expecting a 12-month planning process, which will include statutory consultation. And then if we're successful in the planning application process, we'll be eligible to enter the RES auction process, which is ultimately the ability for projects to compete against each other to deliver the lowest cost of electricity to the consumer. And then finally, if we're successful through that project or through that process, we'll be eligible to receive a grid connection offer, move towards our final design, procurement and into construction. But a key element of this delivery timeframe is being operational in advance of 2030. And that gives us the ability to contribute to Ireland's 2030 targets of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. And then just finally on this slide, looking at the ongoing community and fisheries liaison, this is something that we see throughout the entirety of our project, and it's applicable obviously to this project, but all the projects that we develop. So while we have these individual consultation events, it's something that we're really keen to ensure that we continuously engage with the community and any of the stakeholders relevant to the project. So I'll just pass you on then to Caroline to talk about the progress to date and some more detail on the environmental work that we're doing at the moment.
Hi everybody, I'm Caroline Roach and I'm going to take you through the next few slides. So I look after the environmental and the consenting element of the proposed South Irish Sea projects, and it's great to be able to speak with you all this evening and fill you in on the work that we've been doing to date. So as you've heard previously from both Owen and Derek, back in 2019 we applied to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage for a foreshore licence. And a foreshore licence, it's essentially permission to undertake certain types of surveys, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on those types of surveys in the next slide. As part of that application process, we went through a public consultation in early 2020. We know that there are a number of other projects linked to this area, and you may be aware of one in particular, a project by DP Energy that's currently undergoing that same public consultation phase that we did last year. And just to save any confusion, so these are two entirely different projects, they're proceeding at different stages, and theirs is an entirely separate consultation process to the one that we're going through now and of which this webinar is a part. So the licence was granted last September. And this enables us to carry out those surveys in the near future. And the information then that we'll gather through those surveys will provide us with essential information to progress the project design and ultimately the environmental assessments. So while we were waiting then for the foreshore licence to be granted, we were able to progress a number of surveys that did not require that licence. So since early 2020, we've had a team of highly experienced ornithologists or bird experts and marine mammal experts carrying out monthly aerial seabird and marine mammal surveys across the site. And we need 24 months of data for this element. So birds are one of the animal species that are given key consideration when we design a wind farm, and therefore we need very detailed information on their presence in the area. We also have bird specialists carrying out bird migration surveys from a number of coastal locations, and these surveys focus on the migration routes that a variety of ducks and geese take when they're coming into overwinter in Wexford Harbour and a number of other special protection area sites along the southeast coast. In addition to this, then fisheries is another key area that requires focused attention at this early design stage. And our fisheries liaison officers, or our FLOs, with assistance from the local fishermen, have been carrying out fishing activity surveys in the area. So these are two areas, the birds and the mammals and the fisheries, where the more data that we can have, the better. And that's why it was crucial for us to start these surveys as early as we could. In 2020, then we also commenced the Environmental Impact Assessment, or the EIA process. And as part of that, we'll be producing an Environmental Impact Assessment report, or an EIAR, and this will be submitted to An Bord Pleanála as part of a planning application sometime in 2023. The purpose of an EIAR is to determine any of the potential impact that the proposed wind farm might have on the environment. And while this project will play its part in our fight against the climate crisis, as Derek mentioned previously, we're also facing a biodiversity crisis. And we will be ensuring that this project is delivered in a way that is sensitive to the marine environment and that will protect and enhance it. And I think this is very much achievable. And the EIA process is key to that. The EIAR has been prepared by teams of highly experienced specialists, so ranging from archaeologists, the ornithologists, marine ecologists, fisheries experts, noise experts, and landscape and visual experts, to name but a few. And the EIAR will also be carried out to best practice and comply with all national and international regulations and guidance. And all stages of the project will be assessed as part of the EIA. So that covers the construction stage, the operational stage, and then finally the decommissioning stage. And as part of the EIA, it will involve consultation with key stakeholders, with prescribed bodies, and of course the public. And this is the first of those introductory consultation phases. We're currently at the constraints and the optioneering phase of the project. And once we have the project design progress that bit further, we'll be preparing what's called an Eia Scoping report. And it's the scoping report that will set out all of the topics that need to be assessed as part of the Environmental Impact Assessment report. And we will be going out to public consultation on this in 2022. And again, we will be welcoming feedback from members of the public at this stage as well. In addition then to the Fisheries Liaison Officer that I just mentioned, we also have a Project Community Liaison Officer, or a CLO, who has been available throughout this consultation process to work with the local community and to be a point of contact for all interested stakeholders. And this will continue throughout the rest of the planning phase. We can jump on to the next slide there. So the surveys then that are being carried out at the moment, some are ongoing and some are planned for the near future. And they fall into three different categories. So the first is the physical environment. And these are predominantly the surveys that we are waiting for the foreshore licence to carry out. So we'll be undertaking geophysical surveys, which will gather data on water depth, on seabed features, on sediment type, geohazards, archaeological features. We'll also be doing some geotechnical surveys, which is the collection of samples from the seabed to determine the sediment properties. And then there'll also be met ocean surveys. So these focus on the general sea conditions and wind speed in the area. These types of surveys help determine the most suitable turbine locations, the suitable foundation types, and the installation methods and the cable routes. We will also be carrying out a range of onshore studies over the coming 18 months to assess the landfall site suitability and then the onshore route options. From an ecological perspective, then, as I mentioned previously, the bird and mammal surveys are well underway, and these will continue for a minimum of 24 months. We'll also be carrying out surveys to determine the habitats and the species on and in the seabed and in the water column, in the intertidal areas where the cables will come ashore, and then also along the onshore cable route and the grid connection locations. As regards the human environment then, so as I mentioned previously, we're currently undertaking this fishing activity surveys to understand the commercial fisheries in the area. And we've completed a number of archaeological, navigational and grid assessments to date. Upcoming surveys then planned for next year will include the landscape and visuals, traffic and navigation, noise and vibration surveys, archaeology and cultural heritage, socioeconomic and tourism and amenity studies. And the results of all of these surveys will feed into the EIAR and to the design of the project. And once we know what is there, we can then assess the level of interaction that the proposed wind farm would have. And at that stage, then, if any mitigation measures are required to minimise those impacts, then they will be identified. And that brings me on then to my final slide, just on fisheries engagement. So as Owen mentioned, this is a really key area for us in terms of stakeholder engagement, and we appointed a team of fisheries liaison officers back in 2019, and they've been engaging with the fishermen and women in the area for well over 18 months. We're committed to coexistence with the fishing community throughout all stages of the proposed project, and input from the fishing industry will play a key role in the survey planning phase, in the wind farm design process, and then in the identification of appropriate mitigation measures. Over the past 18 months, we've been carrying out peer visits in the locality, from Kilmore Quay right up to Wicklow, to hear the views, the concerns, and also the needs of the local fishing communities. We have prepared and circulated project updates, survey briefing documents, and FAQs to the fishing industry as a direct result of these engagements. In addition to the knowledge gained during these discussions with fishermen, the monthly afloat, or those fishing activity surveys that I mentioned previously, are ongoing. And this allows us to better understand the level, the pattern, and the seasonality of fishing in the area. This will help us to plan our survey activities in a way that can avoid or reduce the level of interaction that we would have with the day-to-day fishing activities. And this information gathered then will also play an important part in the EIAR, and that will include specific topics on fish and shellfish ecology, on commercial and recreational fisheries, and also on aquaculture. A longer-term coexistence strategy will then be developed and agreed with the local fishing interests, and we will identify measures to mitigate any potential impacts once the project has further progressed. From our engagements to date, we are hearing the fishermen just want to stay fishing, and they'll be able to do that. We want to see both industries thrive and complement each other, and we will be exploring ways to achieve this. Further then to our project level engagement, we look forward to playing a key part in the industry level engagement to be facilitated by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in the coming months. This group aims to establish a framework for communications and a set of guiding principles for interaction between the fishing industry and then the offshore renewable industry, to identify opportunities for mutually beneficial coexistence and to agree best practice. So I'll pass you over now to Rosie to discuss the rest of the community engagement.
Thanks, Caroline. Yes, I'm Rosie Billingham. I'm Community Engagement Manager with Eia Renewables. So I work across our development, construction and operational onshore wind farms and our other renewable energy projects. So I'd like to, and I'm going to just outline our community engagement work, but first, just a quick reminder, so do keep your questions coming because I'm going to be putting them to the panel shortly. As you know, and you can see here on this slide, this is our first South Irish Sea public consultation. So yes, there'll be another next year, and that's when we'll have the detailed design, and the final consultation will then allow people to consider the refined proposal, the development proposal. But do remember, as Caroline says, we've got those dedicated project liaison officers on the ground. They're available throughout. They're already holding online briefings. They're meeting people on the ground. They're providing project updates through newsletters and the website, and they're available to contact and meet throughout this process. So right now, and I hope you've already seen this, this is our virtual exhibition. You can see here on the right of this slide. It's on our website. You can log on, you can click and enter, and you really enter a virtual community hall. So you can sort of walk around, as it were, look at the boat, look at the banners, get information, and you can view very early visualizations of what the wind farm could look like from shore. So do, if you haven't had a look, do have a look. Go and enter our virtual community hall. Just moving on to the next slide then, we've already actually been asked by local councillors about community investment and the government's Renewable Energy Support Scheme, or RES. Under the Offshore RES scheme, the South Irish Sea offshore wind farm would invest in the local area, and that's through a multi-million euro community benefit fund, as Owen said. So the details of how Offshore RES funds are going to operate, they're still in draft form, and they have yet to be finalised. But I can tell you that Energia, we have a long history of supporting the communities in which we operate. Our ambition it's to create a lasting legacy for local communities by building tailored funds, building them to meet the needs of the community in conjunction with the community. And if we move on to the next slide, I can show you some examples, because Energia, we own and operate 15 onshore wind farms, and that's across the island of Ireland. We're currently investing, as Derek said, over 550,000, coming up to 600,000 euro every year in local communities through these funds. And our overall investment in these funds to date is around 2 million euro. So we've got some examples here, and first off you can see Jamie Cusker there. It's a student bursary scheme that we recently set up. He lives beside one of our wind farms, our largest wind farm in fact, and he's getting his tuition fees paid for his BA in education, and he tells us that that's really relieving some of the financial strain upon him, and it gives him some financial certainty as well, because we've committed to paying his tuition fees throughout his course. So next you can see St Eunan's School there, St Eunan's National School. They received a grant for new changing rooms, and this was actually part of a community project bringing together different communities in the local area. It's part of a state-of-the-art sports facility for the area. And finally, you can see their Knox Community Association. They used €100,000 capital investment grant over a period of 5 years to build a lock boardwalk trail. So keen walkers were already using this, but the trail means that it's now open up for families, people of every age, mothers pushing buggies with young children. And that's one of the projects that was an idea that came from the community and has been built for the community. Now, during the course of this consultation, we've received questions about how the funds are going to be managed. We'll obviously follow best practice and meet the offshore res terms and conditions, but they've yet to be finalised. But in terms of the funds that we're already operating, we work with independent charitable foundations who administer the funds on our behalf, and that really is to guarantee transparency, good governance and accountability. And the thing to remember, it's very important to us that each fund is built with the community for the community and in partnership with all sections of that local community to meet the area's specific needs. So on our next slide, you can see what what we're doing with our local partnerships. So I'm going to hand you over to Amy now.
Thanks, Rosie. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy O'Shaughnessy, and I look after some of our other community partnerships at Energia. The guys have made reference already, I suppose, to the scale of our business operations all across the country. And we currently have over 820,000 home and business customers. So one of our core values at Energia is to be community focused. And so we try to make a positive impact in the communities that we serve, and especially at a local level where we can. And I look after a variety of brand partnerships that help us to do that. So just to touch on, I suppose, some of the local partnerships in the Southeast, we're quite heavily involved in sport. And we've been very proud supporters of Wexford Youth's women's football since about 2015 now, I think. They have a really brilliant setup down there in Ferrycarrig, a really talented bunch of girls. So we're really looking forward to their FAI Cup final game now next week against Shelburne, and hopefully there'll be more silverware coming back to Wexford out of that, fingers crossed. We're very involved in rugby, and the Energia All Ireland League is one of our biggest brand sponsorships. And we've been really delighted this season to welcome Wicklow RFC into the women's division. It means they're one of the top 10 women's teams in the country now, which is really a brilliant testament to everyone at the club to get to this level. It's a really important step in the development of Irish women's rugby. And then on the men's side of the house, important to note, Enniscorthy, they're in Division 2C. I think they're in the top 3 at the moment, so they're doing well. And Gorey as well are also involved in the Energia Junior Cup. So then outside of sport, we have a couple of other significant brand partnerships at community level. The Energia Get Ireland Growing campaign with our partners GIY has been running since 2016 now. And that's an initiative that encourages people and communities to take a little step towards more sustainable living by growing some of their own food. And we've had lots of interest locally in this, and we've awarded funding across the years to many groups, including some of those mentioned on the slide. And lastly, I suppose our other long-standing partnership, Seachtain na Gaeilge, Le Energia, which is a celebration of our language and culture. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It gives us another opportunity to support community events and community groups across the country during the festival in March each year. So Sinead, that's it from me. Gur Magwiv.
Thanks, Amy. This is the last slide. Basically, just want to remind you about our virtual exhibition room. Do take a look, do leave your feedback, and remember you can contact our liaison officers via phone or email at any time. But right now, though, we're here to answer your questions, so do keep them coming. Where similar issues have been raised, we're going to group them together. But first off, we have a question for Owen here. I think this one's for you. It's a question on project location. How was the survey area identified?
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so this goes back to probably the feasibility study that we undertook in 2018, and that was one that looked at environmental and engineering constraints, and it looked all around the coast of Ireland. So there's a number of number of constraints that we need to take into account: water depth, wind resource, environmental habitats. But that was a study that we undertook using both Irish experience, given the environmental importance, but also international expertise, given that we haven't delivered offshore wind projects in Ireland yet, and it's very much a starting industry. So we really utilise sort of best practice there, and the indications at the moment are that this area is suitable for the development of the offshore wind project. But also, as I said in that slide, this project is at an early stage, and the surveys that will be undertaken by the Foreshore licence will allow us to gain information that will allow us to refine the area. So currently we're studying quite a large area, and then the aim of the work that we're going to be doing over the coming 12 to 18 months will be to refine that area down to an overall project size.
Okay, thanks, Owen. Next up, we've got a question here from Robert. It's on visual impact. Caroline, I'm going to put this one to you. Robert says, I'm supportive of offshore wind energy and appreciate its value, but as a seafront resident, I do want to see what the impact will be visually.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so look, we do recognise that a lot of the coastal communities around our shore are learning about offshore wind for the first time. And naturally from that, there are going to be concerns about the visual impact. We also understand the importance of sensitive development, and we will be undertaking a thorough environmental assessment and engineering design process to just say that at the outset. So given the I suppose, importance of the visual impact element and despite the fact that we're at this early stage, part of this consultation, we did want to give some indication as to what the wind farm could look like. So we have produced early indicative photo illustrations of the South Irish Sea project. They're available to view in the online virtual room, which can be accessed through the website. They provide an indication of what a typical 600 to 800 megawatt wind farm could look like, located within part of the survey area. They're illustrative only at this point, and they're subject to change depending on the findings of our environmental and our engineering studies. They're based on what we believe future wind turbines, will look like that will be put in the water at the time frame that we're talking about. Currently, turbines used today are in the region of about 14 to 16 megawatts, and as technology develops, large turbines will be available, which will mean fewer turbines would then be required to meet the capacity of a wind farm. And just, I suppose, further on that, then the EIAR itself will contain a really detailed seascape, landscape and visual impact assessment. And this will be undertaken by qualified and highly experienced landscape and visual experts, and it will be carried out in accordance with all best practice and current guidance. And as the project progresses, these experts will be producing accurate photo montages of what the wind farm would look like from various coastal locations and also from sensitive inland locations. These will be made available through future public consultation processes and also available on our website, and we will be looking for feedback from members of the public during those phases as well. So we will be producing, once we have better understanding of what the wind farm will look like, we absolutely will be producing images to make everybody aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. The next question is from Mark about the distance from shore. So Derek, Mark says that he's asking really, should the wind turbines be at least 22 kilometres from the coast? And he's looking to examples in Germany and wanting an explanation of why some of the turbines might be placed closer to shore.
Thanks, Rosie. This is an important question and one which I suppose isn't the first time we've been asked or I've been asked around this issue. So probably just take a moment just to go through maybe the 22 kilometres, the European examples, and then this why so close to the coast piece, which again has come up a couple of times. So probably the important point to note in terms of offshore wind globally today is that its location is determined more by the sea depth and seabed conditions than it is by any distance to shore metric, which in the Irish case, I think is really, really important. Ireland there's a shelf effectively around the entire coast. And once we go beyond a certain distance, and the purpose of most of these projects, and for the purpose of South Irish Sea, it's sort of beyond 25 kilometres, there's a significant drop off in the depth of the seabed. So if we look at the European examples, so about, or even globally, over 99% of all offshore wind turbines installed are fixed bottom wind turbines. And I'll come back to other technologies like floating in a minute, but the overwhelming majority installed to date are fixed bottom. At the end of 2020, about 65 projects across Europe were within 22 kilometres from shore. Now, that's about a quarter of the installed capacity of offshore wind. A quarter of all the offshore wind capacity was within 22 kilometres. No country in Europe or elsewhere has banned the construction of offshore wind turbines, fixed bottom turbines within 22 kilometres. So the 22 kilometres is a number that I suppose comes up quite frequently, but it's important to stress no country has banned it. Countries do build beyond it, and they build beyond it because they have seabed conditions and depths that allow it. But in Ireland, that isn't the case. And even as an example of the future pipeline, this isn't just bound to the current technology. There's about 16,000 megawatts planned or applying for planning in terms of projects to build within a 22 kilometre distance today. So I think really important that we understand that the projects that are built today and operating, many of which are within 22 kilometres from the shore. And obviously in countries where it allows them to go further out, they can go further out behind existing wind farms, or they can just simply go further out, perhaps to maximise the wind resource for the project. But in Ireland, as I said, the seabed conditions are such that for the technology of fixed bottom wind turbines, a depth of about beyond 65 metres makes them impossible to install. As we go out to the eastern boundary of our site, we're at about that depth. Going beyond it makes it impossible to put in a fixed bottom turbine. If we then look at other technologies, there is perhaps a misperception that other technologies like floating aren't being done because of some want or view that we can't do this, or we don't want to do this, or it's too expensive to do it for the company. Now, if we take the 99% of everything that's been installed has been fixed bottom, it is a proven technology, one that can deliver at scale, and one which our projects are based on. Floating hasn't, it's sort of at a demonstration stage globally, there's very little of it installed. But what we do know is that it's 2 to 3 times the price or the cost today. Now we expect that to fall significantly in the future, but today it's significantly more expensive. Now, how these projects are underpinned is through an auction mechanism. The state runs a support scheme auction. It is only the lowest cost projects that get through and are awarded contracts that underpin their investment. And importantly in that, what happens for all projects, including South Irish Sea when it gets to that stage, is that your your success is determined by how low your cost is, which means that at the moment technology like floating just doesn't work. So it's important to understand, I suppose, that aspect of it, in that the auction delivers least cost. The least cost technology today is fixed bottom, and the limitations on fixed bottom around Ireland are that really can't be installed anywhere beyond 25 kilometres, not because nobody wants to, but because the seabed conditions and the water depth goes well below 65 metres. So there's an awful lot in that answer. There's probably one other final point. Just it again has been a question maybe that's come in, has certainly come in to me individually, but possibly has come in from others this evening. But that this isn't being done because it in some way disadvantages us or might lower the opportunity, or the return is often quoted out of these projects. What's important to remember is that the auction process sets a price. If the project obtains a price in excess of that in the electricity market, it pays it back. And if it gets one below that, it receives it. So there is a two-sided relationship here. The project really gets what it needs to survive and nothing more. Now, in the context of this project, we're talking about a €2 billion investment. Adding additional couple of kilometres of cabling isn't going to really matter to the overall scale of this project. It's probably akin to building a house and just trying to figure out, well, how many lights would you like to have in that house? It is, in the overall grand scheme of the project, it isn't huge. So I think, just to conclude, the 22 kilometre piece is out there and often quoted. It doesn't have an awful lot of significance behind it, and certainly isn't a rule anywhere. The projects are being built in the location largely because of the Irish sea depth. They are, I suppose, where they are because of that reason, and technology that would allow us to go out beyond that just isn't at the point today where Irish consumers or could cover the cost, because it's ultimately where that cost sits. But finally, it also doesn't allow us move as quickly as we need to move. What I tried to stress, I think, when I went through my slides, is that this is an incredibly urgent need to deliver here. And at least 5 gigawatts by 2030 gives Ireland the opportunity to achieve our decarbonisation targets. Waiting for new technologies or new solutions will greatly inhibit that. And any restriction on building outside of 22 kilometres, on building within 22 kilometres, would certainly and conclusively end any chance of Ireland achieving that target.
Thanks, Derek. We've got a question here from Maria. Maria is asking about the grid connection. In other words, she's asking, where is it proposed to bring the power cables ashore, and will the connection to the grid be overground or, crucially, underground? Owen, I think this one for you.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so I suppose we're at this stage, we're still investigating a number of potential grid connection points, and we're working with EirGrid to refine those options and really identify the optimal solution for the project. There is an element of surveying areas that we're potentially assessing as part of the Forestry license, so we'll be looking at cable corridors and the potential routes to the connection points. And that'll give us further information in relation to both the environmental and engineering characteristics. Once we're further down the line in terms of having a preferred option for the grid connection, that will form part of a further public consultation, and then we'll be able to provide more detail on that. Specifically in relation to how it's connected, the cable will be from the offshore project substation will be buried in the seabed, and then it would remain buried onshore as well. So it wouldn't be coming above ground from say the transition point, and then we'll connect into the existing likely 220 kV network on the coast.
Okay, thanks, Owen. Another one for you about the supply chain. Mark says, please outline your strategy for engaging local suppliers and supporting local employment over the full project lifecycle.
Yeah, and I think that kind of talking about the full project life cycle is important, because we are at an early stage, and the spend that will be happening now over the project is certainly in that development phase. But I suppose if you look at the overall project, it represents approximately a €2 billion investment. A lot of that comes during the construction phase, but a significant amount during the development as well. We'll be aiming to retain as much of that investment in Ireland, and I gave a figure of 500 million. But even at this early stage, we're looking at how we engage with local companies and local supply chain. We're already utilising local companies, some of which are assisting in the surveys, in our design work and in our consultation phases as well. And then in the longer term, in the construction phase, it goes back to that number of 800 jobs during the construction phase, some of which will be from outside, but obviously that will create employment locally as well. And then finally, in terms of the operations phase, between 70 and 100 long-term jobs there. But how we're engaging specifically with supply chain as well is we have a supplier portal on the website, and we'd really encourage any of the companies that are interested in engaging with us in the project to get in touch. We've done a number of sort of meet the buyer events previously, but through that portal you can just register the type of services that you provide. Obviously we're going to be in the development phase for the next number of years, but it's really useful for us to have a log of those, and we'll also be doing our own proactive engagement as well in terms of looking at the potential supply chain companies that are available to us at the moment.
And another one here for you, Owen. It's where will the operations and maintenance facility be located? A lot of people wanting to know that.
Yeah, so I suppose that's similar in a sense to the Grid Connection, in that we're continuing to study potential options. We don't have a defined or a preferred solution at the moment. I suppose what we can be definitive on is that it'll be located in Ireland and adjacent to the project area. But there's a number of characteristics and a number of studies that we need to undertake, particularly around the size of the project and the type of facility that we need. That's still ongoing. So again, as we have more detail on that, that'll form part of a later stage public consultation.
Thanks, Owen. Caroline, turning to you, when will the marine surveys be carried out?
I assume by that, Rosie, that the marine surveys will be the foreshore license for the site investigation surveys, and on that we're in the process of appointing the survey contractors. And until we have them appointed, we won't have a set timeline for the actual surveys, but it's our expectation that they'd be carried out in the next kind of spring-summer period. We would be continuing to liaise closely with the fishing industry at that pre-survey stage and well in advance of the surveys commencing, to ensure that the fishing can continue where possible and that we minimise any sort of interaction that we have with the day-to-day fishing activities. And we would also be issuing a marine notice in advance of those survey commencing to notify the wider marine community about the proposed surveys and that the presence of those survey vessels in the area.
Thanks, Caroline. There's a question here from, I think it's one for you as well, from Deborah, asking about the potential impacts of the project on marine leisure activities, so sailing, for instance.
Okay, so I suppose sticking with the marine surveys element, first of all, we would not expect there to be any impact on marine leisure activities from the survey vessels. It would be, simply a small number of vessels in the area, and again, we would have the marine notices issued in advance of that. I suppose with regard to the wind farm itself then, and leisure activities and navigation, so a detailed navigational risk assessment would be carried out as part of that EIA, and that would determine things like the likely collision risk of marine traffic, including the recreational vessels in the area, and these studies will be carried out in consultation with the Marine Survey Office and the Commissioner of Irish Lights. During the construction phase, for safety reasons, there would be a requirement to have some exclusion zones around the immediate construction site, and again, they would be no larger than would be needed to ensure safety, and they'd also be guided by the Marine Survey Office. I suppose with regard to sailing then between the turbines, when the operational wind farm is in place, again, this will be subject to compliance with all marine safety legislation and recommendations from the Department of Transport. Other leisure activities, I suppose swimming in the area, the construction stage for the wind farm itself is so far offshore, it would have no impact on sea swimming. When at the later stages of the construction phase, when the cables would be laid and brought into shore, then there may be some small interference with some swimming or some recreational activities while the vessel, the cable laying vessel, would be in the area. But this will all be assessed in detail in the EIA.
Thanks, Caroline. And another question on impacts of coastal erosion. Have they been considered?
They will be considered, and actually coastal erosion, I suppose it's one of the main areas where if we don't address climate change, sea level rise and the increased frequency of storms, etc., will have severe consequences for our coastline. We are aware of situations when you add new infrastructure to marine environment, it can affect waves and currents. This is typically associated with large solid structures like harbour walls or pier extensions. And as part of the EIA, we'd be examining how the coastal processes, so the currents, the wave, sediment deposition patterns would all be impacted by the wind farm. And we will do this by collecting site-specific current data, wave height data, wind speed data, and then we will use all of that in a hydrodynamic model. And that would determine any changes to the coastal processes before and after the wind farm is installed. And we would also, as part of that, be looking at the cumulative impact of not just our wind farm, but of any other projects, either constructed or again in the consenting phase, would also be assessed as part of the EIA.
Thanks, Caroline. One for you, Owen. What ports or other locations are being considered as manufacturing or assembly hubs?
Yeah, so this is work that we're looking at ourselves, but probably more crucially that we're looking at as part of Wind Energy Ireland, of which we're a member. So we've engaged again directly and as an industry level with each of the ports around the coast of Ireland. I suppose it's at this stage there aren't any ports that are suitable for the construction stage. But there's a huge appetite in terms of how they develop, and a number of the ports will have plans in terms of how they're going to develop out the port over the next number of years to support offshore wind. So it's really a key area where we're providing a lot of support to the ports in relation to sort of engineering input and project timelines and the various inputs they need for planning their works. I think it's definitely useful in that the growth of the offshore wind energy sector, it'll maximise the regional economic benefits and create local jobs specific to projects and also on a more wider level. And you can see that in port towns. You can see it in the Port of Hull in the UK and a number of other ports in Europe that have really grown as a result of offshore wind. But it also brings other industries and other spin-off industries. So it really is a positive benefit, and we need to work both on a project level and from an industry perspective to ensure that we can maximise that benefit for Ireland. And that's going to be critical over the next 2 or 3 years.
Thanks. So, in 2 questions here that I think they're linked. What's the lifespan of the turbines, and what happens at decommissioning stage at the end of the project life, as it were?
Yeah, so typical sort of project lifetimes can be 25 to 30 years, and that'll depend on sort of site-specific assessments of the loads that the turbines may face in terms of the wind or the waves and the currents. But we'd expect between 25 and 30 years, and that's supported by the maintenance program that you put in place that'll be carried out from the O&M base. In terms of the decommissioning phase, although it is that 25 or 30 years beyond construction, it's something that we have to assess as part of the environmental impact assessment. So it's really about what you can do to take down the infrastructure that's been put in place. So depending on the type of foundation that you're going to be building out, it has a different means of being deconstructed than another type of foundation. So those are assessments that are ongoing at the moment for us, and once we have more detail, again, that'll be part of a later consultation. We'd expect that as part of the planning process, that will be very much defined in terms of decommissioning bonds and how that phase of the project is treated. But looking at the assessments, that's something that we have to do right up front and at the moment.
Thanks, Owen. No, I'm conscious of time here because it's 8 o'clock. But before I hand back to you, Derek, actually to close, please do remember that a recording of this webinar is going to be made available on our website, and the questions that are asked during this consultation will be providing the answers on the website. But right now, you can go on the site and you can book a one-to-one virtual session with the team. Now, we know that face-to-face engagement is best, and obviously that's why our dedicated project liaison officers are available to meet in person, but we're also watching the changing public health guidance and COVID numbers very carefully, as Derek said at the opening of this session, because we really want to be able to organise an open door public information session for the next stage of our consultation, and that's if the restrictions allow it and it's safe to do so. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and thank you, the panel, for answering the questions. I'm going to hand you back now to our Head of Corporate Affairs, Derek Scully.
Thank you, Rosie, and thanks everyone, and particularly thank you to all of you who joined us. I think, as Rosie said, we acknowledge the limitations this format brings, but it is probably the best in the circumstances, and it is no way the last you will hear from us. Hopefully the team have outlined it's quite a significant amount of engagement going to happen over the next few years, and we really hope you're going to be part of that. We are a business who pride ourselves on our community engagement. It is something we do all of the time with our renewable projects, but it's something we do every day with the homes and businesses across Ireland that we supply. So what works in the community, what works for you, what works in terms of making Ireland a better place and a decarbonised economy, maximises that opportunity and is sort of win-win for everybody. So look, we're committed to this project, we're committed to decarbonisation, we're committed to ensuring homes and businesses have the cheapest way to meet Ireland's climate targets into the future. This project forms an important part of that, and you are all important parts of this project. So please continue to engage with us. Hopefully the next time we meet, it will be face to face. Hopefully you found this session useful. As I said, it is at an early stage. You perhaps didn't get all of the answers you wanted, but certainly at any point provide those questions, and when we can, we will provide the answers. So just to thank you again, apologies for running a few minutes over. Have a nice evening. Thank you.